Off the road, on the road, gullies, through water. You could get stuck with the Jeep. It'd be very hard to do. But all you had to do was take 5 or 6 men, they'd have little handles on it, they lift it up physically and just put it back on the road.
They laid smoke for advancing tanks, scouted the enemy, evacuated the wounded, and brought essential supplies to the battlefield.
And it was a terrific vehicle for being near the front lines, because I swear you could talk to it and it would hush up. You couldn't hear the motor, you couldn't hear a squeak. You just couldn't beat them.
It was sort of de rigueur to have a Jeep if you were any kind of an officer. Every time you saw a war picture, there was Patton with his guns in his holsters. He was always in a Jeep.
General George S. Patton even customized his Jeep with a red leather seat and a pair of air horns on the hood. Everyone from presidents to movie stars wanted to catch a ride in this rough and ready little car. And when it wasn't chauffeuring celebrities, it plowed snow, brought good cheer, and provided comfort for the body and soul. It could even pull a 52-ton supply train at 22 miles an hour. The Jeep was the best buddy a GI ever had. Cartoons in the Army newspaper, Stars and Stripes, captured this love affair. The artist was Bill Mauldin. Walter Munger was one of his fans.
He was a GI's favorite. And of course, he used to knock the officers, but even they got a kick out of him because what he put in a picture was worth 1,000 words. I don't know if you remember Joe and Willie. They were his two characters, two infantrymen. And the conversations that used to go on between them, it was terrific. He just really had a hands-on view of the whole thing.
The first Jeep I'd ever seen was driven by the master sergeant, a battalion sergeant major. And he was very unhappy with it because it wasn't a horse. And I was fascinated by the four-wheel drive and everything about it. And I asked him at one point if a front axle broke or a wheel broke. Do you shoot it? And he thought that was very funny. I drew a cartoon of it, and ever since then I've been eating out on that cartoon. It's the American Rolls Royce. It doesn't ride like one. It certainly doesn't sound like one. But it runs forever, too.
For Americans, this square-shouldered, go-anywhere, do-anything little car became more than a piece of military hardware. It became a treasured symbol of the American spirit that won the war.
The Museum of Modern Art had a display of the most beautiful cars in the world. And one of those vehicles sitting alongside the Accord and the Lincoln Continental and the Rolls-Royce and the Talbot Lago from France was a Jeep.
At war's end, America's love affair with the car was about to accelerate into a romance so wild, so kinky, so outrageous, it would take the rest of the century to recover. The Finn, the fabulous 50s, and Rebels Without a Cause were just around the corner.
The following is a TBS original.
TBS presents a world premiere television event. In Part 1, the love affair began. America became a nation on wheels. Tonight, the trip of a lifetime kicks into high gear. From Finns to Beatles, stock cars to suburbs, the backseat to the baby boom. Part 2 of America's lifelong obsession with the automobile. Driving passion continues. Next, exclusively on TBS.
Power, sex, chrome. After World War II, everything returning GIs wanted was coming their way. The American love affair with the car was about to shift into high gear. After 4 long years of hardship, Americans were yearning for the good life.
And everybody, as they came home, the first thing they went for is, well, where do I get a car? The people at home were rationed. There were no cars built during the war. It took a while to switch over from building tanks and jeeps to building cars, so they were always short.
In Oregon, Illinois, a sleepy farm town in America's heartland, returning soldiers waited years for a new car. At a nearby Pontiac dealership, Herb Davis saved the few new cars he got for his oldest and best customers.
Oh, I had, I think, 8 cars in the year of '48. And I had a list of about 200 people that wanted cars.
I remember the first car I bought, I worked for Ford and I'd get on a waiting list. And everybody was so hungry for them, they didn't care. They didn't care about anything. They just wanted a car.
Detroit's Big Three had nothing to offer except cars designed before the war, dressed up with a little chrome trim.
It wasn't until about 1949 that really new cars started to appear.
One of the first is the 1949 Ford, and it's a completely redesigned automobile.
When I first saw that, I thought, wow, look at that car, a Ford.
The design was ultra-modern, a real shocker from Ford, whose styling had begun to seem a little dowdy. Underneath the sleek and sexy body was the company's first new suspension system since 1906. Driving the new model, they claimed, was like riding on air. Automotive luxury was all the rage. You could now shift without a clutch, and you could signal a turn without sticking your arm out the window. Along with big overhead valve V8 engines, you could have power doodads galore. Options like power windows, power seats, power steering, and power brakes were about to take gadget-happy Americans by storm. In the 1950s, we were like kids in a candy store.
I mean, this was the same era, let's not forget, when men's ties suddenly got totally wild. The same spirit of let's go wild, we deserve it, was applied to automobile design. And by the late 40s and early 50s, you have the first signs of the automobile as something almost irrelevant to its function. You have the automobile as a piece of rolling sculpture.
Every fall, under heavy security, General Motors rolled its new models into the ballroom of New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel. They were the best-kept secrets in the country. Crowds lined up around the block and waited for hours just to see what next year's models would look like. Inside, Broadway musicians and choreographers prepared for a car show extravagant enough to make the national newsreels.
Now touring America's principal cities, General Motors Motorama is attracting crowds like this one of 55,000 New Yorkers who throng to the Waldorf Astoria on opening day. In the hotel's grand ballroom, the show is on. A ballet tells the story of the progress of engineering. After the ballet, standard production models from each of the 5 automobile divisions parade onto the mechanized stage, accompanied by models wearing specially created gowns.
It was interesting to see your designs in this environment because you're so familiar with it and you worked so hard on it. You saw it through all the changes and all the times that things weren't working. And then finally to walk into Waldorf and with the lights on this model and see this thing finished was really an exciting thing for the designer.
The man responsible for all this hype, not to mention the look of half the cars in America, was Harley Earl, head of GM's design department. Working under him was Chuck Jordan, who in 1949 was hired by Earl at the tender age of 22.
I remember when I went there, I thought he was God. He was 6'4".